You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. I have been anxiously anticipating this interview with the amazing Mike Trupiano. So welcome, Mike. I'm so grateful that you're here with me.
Hi, glad to be here.
Well, I would like to let people know, too, that you're in Berlin and I'm close to Portland, Oregon. So it's morning for me and evening for you. So I'm waking up and you're probably winding down. But I wanted to read your bio so people that don't know you can get to know you. So Mike Trupiano is an adopted person, a comedic writer, a performer. He also does stand-up comedy, voice acting, and teaches storytelling. And I also found this on your website, Mike, and I just cracked up when I read it. You said your specialties are deadpan, physical comedy, improvisation, and that you excel at playing arrogant, incompetent authority figures.
That is true.
I was like, wow, I can't wait to talk about that. So, Mike, normally I start an interview and you build your story from a baby to a man. But I was really thinking about your talent and about the storytelling. And I thought it would be really interesting to do this in reverse and talk about setting up like the theater of the imagination for people, because you are a gifted actor and storyteller. So can you kind of set the scene for us, like where you are today and how storytelling through comedy and through acting has helped you, or how did it become such an important part of your life? Because you are hella funny. I don't even know if that's a word we can still use anymore.
I need another testimonial for my website. So I'll put it on
Okay. You're hella funny.
I did a lot of comedy, improv, and stand-up in Chicago and New York. I never talked about the adoption stuff in that context. I actually heard an adopted comedian, try to talk about it, and he didn't quite nail it. And I thought, I don't know if I can do this. It seems too vulnerable. I say it was only after coming to Berlin and participating in English, not even English, I mean, it's English-German, but a stand-up show. A storytelling show. And I thought, you know what, let me talk about what's going on with me. You know, I've written so much stuff about, if you listen to my older stuff, it's so much plumbing the depths, character monologues, like a guy who's buried alive by his girlfriend, you know, but it's funny, you know, and if you watch it, you'll hear people laughing because he thinks it's a joke. But in Berlin, I started doing adoption stories and immediately got good feedback. First storytelling show I participated in, you know, they vote for the best storyteller, whatever. And with an adoption story, I was voted the best storyteller. And I thought, well, this interests me. Let's keep writing about this. And it felt very challenging, honestly, to talk about this stuff in the open. Adoption being the big secret, me being the secret, my true story being secretive, and nothing to complain about, allegedly. You know, what is there to complain about? You know, you were saved from some probably horrific fate. That was the mythos. So I just kept telling these adoption stories here, doing well, and I have quite a few, and I've started transcribing them, and there could be something there. There could be a book, possibly. In terms of psychologically, incredibly freeing, you know, which is what I think you're asking. Of
yes.
Plumbing this, the various aspects of it. And I've always been self-conscious of what is my identity, you know, and I don't know why, egoism or what, I didn't want my identity to be, oh, he's the adopted guy, you know, it seems something very infantilizing about that. And especially, you know, being a guy, I feel like I have to have it together. You know, I've from a young age, being it from the Midwest, possibly growing up in the 70s, just speaking from my own personal perspective, you don't show weakness, you don't show struggle, you conquer. And who wants to talk about being a baby, and this vulnerability, or even wanting something, the way we were raised in my particular adoptive family is like there was no room for our needs. So to need something, to need to know where I came from, there was no room for that. There were other people's emotional needs to be met. So to explore all this publicly is very liberating,
Yeah, Mike, and I love that. I think that's why I wanted to start with that, because I truly believe that most adopted people are set up to be great actors, because we have to be actors in our life most of the time. In order, it's like a survival skill. And I also know that humor for me is definitely, I want to be a comedian. It's a backup plan. Clearly not going to happen at 56, but humor is such a great way to get the truth out in a way that just twists it and you get a laugh, but it's a relief in a really cool and interesting way. And I think that adopted people deserve to really hone in on their gifts and talents, which a lot of us have, the gift of writing, because that's all we've had. Nobody's listening, so we're going to put it into words. And I think the fact that you're willing to be vulnerable and to tell your story so publicly and to encourage storytelling. And after we go into the depths of your own personal story, I'd really love to swing back to that for our audience. And maybe you could give them advice on storytelling, because you do teach that. Maybe there are some things that you can leave behind for our audience. So, Mike, I know you have a lot of difficult parts of your story, but it's so important for people to understand the trajectory of your journey. So whatever you feel like sharing about your adoption experience and would be really helpful.
Yeah, well, just the basics. I came to the world in 1967, the summer of love, and adopted in St. Louis, Missouri, to a family that could not have children. And 2.5 years later, they adopted a daughter. I'm not going to go into too many details, but it was not happy. There was a lot of mental illness, a lot of violence, religious repression, I would say covert incest. There were my mother, in a sense, coming on to me, clearly making it clear, telling me that my father is stupid and I can only talk to you about certain things. I numbed out. It really drove me inward. I read a lot. I thought, well, these people, nowadays I say they're my guardians, because I don't have that attachment anymore. They were my legal guardians, so not too bright, Not
the fantasy, right?
Not too bright, not many books around the house. And I thought, I don't know, I had this idea, keep reading, expand your mind, and you can get out of here. And at a young age, I started, I have it in my memory, I had a calendar and I was marking off the days. I probably didn't do that. It was too obvious that they would see what I was doing. But in my mind, I had that calendar. I didn't know I was this until years later. There was a word for it. I was a cutter. I had a big hunting knife, and I would, numb out that way. That was the only relief. Not the only relief, but that was a big relief. And somehow I discovered that. Isn't that interesting? No one showed me how to do it. All this before the internet. I think there's a lot of pressure to redeem the family, to go to school, to be amazing. And in retrospect, I see that, I still put all this pressure on myself. You have to be amazing. It's not enough that I do what I do. It's like I have to write not just one screenplay that is a blockbuster. I have to write 7. I've inculcated a lot of the perfectionism that my family instilled in me, and I'm gradually more and more aware of it. But there was this pressure to redeem the family. Look, you're here for us. We've done our part. We saved you. Now make us look good. And this pressure to somehow prosper and thrive, I realized in retrospect, with no basis, nothing to build a life on, no heritage, no roots, no able to see, oh, my uncle does this, has this talent. Maybe I can do that, Possibly a family member with a connection in a creative field or something, anything, genetic mirroring, for God's sake, something basic. Not to mention the physical violence day and night and the constant being afraid. It just felt like you're thrown in a well, and my life has been crawling out of this well. So yeah, other than that, and I tried to free my mind, and I was desperate. I don't know, I thought about running away. I was scared to. I thought, let me just get away. Get away. My whole life has been about getting away, and I still fight this instinct. Even now in Berlin, I'm like, I got to get out of here. I got to go to LA. LA's where it's at. And I'm like, yep. You're not 22 anymore. You're not going to go bus tables in a restaurant, and you can't charm people like you used to. And I don't have the energy I used to. So I wanted to free my mind, and I got a philosophy degree, and I thought about teaching, getting a PhD. And once I got out of school, I realized, well, I'm not going to do that. I was always drawn to I always had a knack for making people laugh. I think it was my adoptive father's dream to be a comedian, and he never had the gumption or the courage to go for it. He had his audience, he had family members, he had friends, he had us, his captive audience. So I did that. I went to Chicago, I went to New York, was in those worlds, had successes. I performed with some people in Chicago who are super famous now. But I just kind of dropped out of the scene, even though I was getting accolades, because I had nothing to build a life on. And I was, quite frankly, I may not have been attempting it physically, but I would say I was suicidal. It just kind of, again, numbed out by spacing out, dissociating. I went back to New York and got involved discovered a adoptee search and support group. And through that, I was connected with a detective in my hometown in St. Louis. And then through that, 2 days later, probably learned the name of my mother through I love this woman, this detective. She was amazing. Through her back alley chicanery. She was a real adoptee fighter. Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, Mike, what a journey so far. I'm so sorry for the difficulties and the pain. And I appreciate your honesty. No, I do. I appreciate your honesty, because people need to understand that when you can't express hurting self, it's just the go-to. It's that lack of feeling worthy. So
yeah,
we'll just go ahead and self-sabotage and self-harm. And, because what other options do you have? You don't know. You're just confused and just trying to release the pain. And I think
I was a good enough person. I realized a therapist told me once, like, your core is actually good, and that's why you didn't do anything too extreme. I had criminal behavior. Like I was arrested for smoking weed once in a cemetery. It was at night.
There's a story there.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Missouri, in the 70s.
Oh my gosh. So the storytelling really, I feel like that's such an important thing to enhance and to speak about. What are some of the things that have happened to you in your soul and your progress because you've been able to tell your story and also help others learn how to tell their own?
Well, okay. So I tell a story. Say I told my first story at this storytelling show here. And then I guess it's like trauma in a sense. Once you feel it, once you process it, it becomes a historical event and it's not happening in this moment. So then I tell this story and then I have an objectivity toward it and I can see it, and I can listen to it again and again. And it's like, well, that is interesting, and unless to me, it's just like, yeah, whatever. I found my mom through a detective, my dad through DNA, and what you didn't,
And so it's like processing, right? the storytelling is processing?
It gives me clarity on, first of all, my story, like how interesting it is to the outsider, to the listener, how unusual it is, and how difficult it is, how unusual it was, and how it reminds me of how much work it was, every day waking up, not knowing, first thing in the morning, first thing that I thought of waking up, laying in bed, who is my mom and dad, And it can be very easy for me to have a lot of resentment about that. Like when I could have been living a life, when I could have been determining what direction do I want to take, having to always be looking backwards. I try to look at it now as material, and it's a lot of material. I've always had a resistance to the easy way. Like if I'm good verbally, then I always tried to really master physics or calculus or something, which never did. Instead of just going with what's good for me, where my talents lie. And had I had encouragement in some fashion, maybe I would have done that at a young age. I would have gone where it's warm, so to speak. But I have all these stories now, which are, I don't know, they kind of have a life of their own now. And they're out there and I get feedback on them. Yeah, it's a kind of constant reminder of, oh, this is what I lived. It's interesting. It was difficult. I can actually do something. So much of this history I see as like something I have to get past to get to my true story.
Right.
And I've resisted this. And now lately I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. This is your story. For whatever reason, God or fate or whatever, this is what's happening. When you talk about this stuff, you get a good result. You feel better. People like it. Yeah, it's been about self-discovery too, I think. Like just kind of surrendering to this is my story.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said, Mike. I was talking to a gentleman, his name is Matt Otto, and he's in the theatrical world in New York City, and we're going to be releasing his episode soon. But he actually set up a scene for us with his birth mom on a stage, and it was so powerful. And I wonder, if you were on a stage and you could put anyone in the audience that you really want to hear your true story, I know who I would put in there. Like, please listen. This is the truth. Who would be in the front row for you? Who would you want to finally hear your story in its completion?
Well, I mean, if it's one person living or dead, I would say my father.
Really?
Like the father I never met.
Yeah. I know. I never met my father either. Oh.
Yeah. The guy who I apparently am a dead ringer for.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a moment if we could have that, Mike? Well, and maybe that's the beauty of storytelling and acting, that if we can't have that, maybe we can imagine it and there's something there, like something that could be healing. So for adopted people that are coming to terms with who they are, they're excavating. I love your word plumbing because, like hot water, cold water, things leaking. Where's that wrench? As we're trying to sort through identity and put the parts and pieces together and get it all working, what would you advise like an adopted person if you were I know this is really general, but can you give us some of the insights that you give the people that you teach storytelling to? Like, what do you ask from them to get it out of them?
This is something I'm working on right now because I'm trying to organize my comedic persona into something kind of coalescing into a viewpoint. And I think it's almost there, but I've finally surrendered my ego to that. Oh, I actually need a teacher, instead of trying to do it all on my own. Growing up the way I did, or perhaps just being adopted, I was just like, well, I'm on my own,
Yeah, I got this.
I'll figure it out. I'll go online or I'll go to the library or something. Well, the first thing is like, whenever a student is struggling to find a story, it's like, okay, and I don't know what to say because I'm kind of following where they're leading me, then I'll come back to like, okay, what does this character want? And then that at least gets us back to that, and then we can develop the story from there. So what did I want? I wanted connection. I wanted roots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Getting clear on that. That is so powerful. That is such a great starting point. What does this character want? i.e., what do I want in most instances?
And, when you're adopted, speaking for myself, when I'm adopted growing up, and it's like, I'm lost, I'm dissociated for good reason. It's like, well, what do you want? It's like, I don't know, I don't know what I want. I guess I wanted to find my family. I wanted a sense of rootedness, but I didn't know it.
Yeah, Mike. And I know you were able to have reunion with your mom, and there is some connection. Could we explore that for a few minutes? Because a lot of people are in reunion, are seeking reunion. Some of us have had, that were didn't go into it tenderly, like myself. What advice and what can you tell us about your reunion that is really noteworthy?
Well, with my mother, I was so out of it. I just kind of showed up on her doorstep. We did talk on the phone once before. The first time I found my mom, I would say was kind of pre-recovery. I had just started, I can't believe it, I had just started primal therapy in New York, which in retrospect, I don't know if that was so great, but that's what I was doing. So I think I was very much at that time like, let's do it. Let's go for it, and there was no ease about my life. And that's kind of how I approached finding my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I also had, I was afraid she was like going to die or something. I was always afraid people were going to die. And so I thought, well, I got to go there right away. She might die. Then I found her again 20 years later. Thankfully, she was still alive. In 20 years, we had no contact.
Aww.
And leading up to that, I was a lot more prepared. And I had a lot lower expectations. I don't know if I had any expectations the first time. I just wanted to see her, and I told myself, well, that's enough.
Yeah, it's rarely enough, is it?
Yeah, I'm in that situation now where it's like, I found my dad's side of the family through DNA, and all I wanted was photos, a name, and a little history, and now I have two siblings and an uncle, and I've been obsessing about, I got to go meet my uncle. I got to go meet him,
Yeah.
And I'm like, it just keeps growing.
Definitely no endpoint. And I think that's why hearing from each other is so important. How did you get through this? What are you doing to survive this? What are the realities of the experience? Because I think so often, I don't know about you, but for me, that the fantasy in my mind kept me alive a lot, imagining what it could be, should be, would be.
Yeah.
And then you have these free falls of disappointment, which, I think you have to hold out hope, but also have a realistic approach.
Yeah, I think if you go in with too realistic an attitude, you're like, well, I don't know if I want to meet them.
Exactly. It has to be a little bit of both, but I don't know. I kind of do extremes really well. So
craziness has brought a lot of interesting things into my life,
Oh yes, mine too. Sure.
When I think of the stories I tell on stage, I think, well, that was a little nuts that I put myself in that situation.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
But I think for searching for a reunion, you try to get in a good psychological space,
Yes, that is really great. Before we leave that subject, Mike, you had said something about primal therapy. I thought I read every self-help book on the planet. What I'm assuming primal therapy is going back to the beginning, but can you expand on that? Because I think that's interesting that's where what you were doing when you had your first reunion.
Yeah, well, that was, I think, developed in the 60s and the 70s. And it was, when I recall, it was like you move in a kind of hypnotic way, repetitive way. This is how I did it, kind of getting your mind in a trance, and you do like not childish, but just breathing, like almost infantile breathing, like panting, and
Mm-hmm.
the idea being that somehow you're going to feel this trapped childhood trauma.
I see.
And I think that did happen a few times. I didn't do so many sessions. It was so intense. I did maybe 20.
That's a lot of
In a soundproof room, of course. Yeah.
No, that's good. Well, let's speak about therapy for a minute too, because boy, it's hard to tough this out on our own. What are your thoughts about, like, how has therapy impacted you and helped you throughout your journey?
Yeah, well, I did the primal therapy in the 90s, and then I didn't have therapy until I'd say like '08. I said to him at the end of it, I said, this has been like a lot of this was like stabilizing me, wasn't it? At the time, you don't realize it. And then I was reading psychology books about stabilizing traumatized people, but it was fantastic because being somewhat stabilized, the feelings could come up. And there were some very long crying jags. And then I had a therapist here, 65 or 70 sessions, and that was very good. Again, cognitive therapy. I don't know now, I'm looking at possibly EMDR.
Yes.
I don't know what else. I get such a good result from what I'm doing now. Like I'm doing kickboxing, which I feel just really gets me into myself one day a week. And I have a punching bag right here.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I had one of those clowns when I was little that you'd hit and they'd bounce back up. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Except that made me more upset. So I think a punching bag might be a great idea because at least it's not smiling back at you.
Yeah.
So,
it is designed for kicking too, this one.
No. Well, I think that's great that you not only talk therapy, but being able to physically move that energy out of our bodies is such a great idea, Mike. And tell us where you're at today. And then as we shape out the last part of the interview, I'd really like you to, go deep into your heart and tell this beautiful audience whatever is on your heart and mind for your hope for them, just as a shared collective global community.
Well, it's a lot, I have to be careful not to be resentful that it takes so much work, to be normal.
Oh boy, does it ever.
And what I'm trying to do now is somehow embrace my perspective. And I think this is the next challenge. Like the artists I like, for example, I'm really getting back into David Cronenberg, and he embraces his perspective. And I like his perspective. I always shy away from my perspective, because I feel maybe it's an adoptee thing. I have to be normal. I have to fit in, despite how odd this upbringing was. And it takes so much effort for me to try to fit in. So I think that's where I'm at, and that's why I'm starting to work with this writing coach and to just somehow embrace this creatively, because I can create. Give me the assignment, I'll knock it out. And I've created a lot of my own stuff. But I'm trying to somehow, like I said before, like just coalesce all of this. I still feel that there's not like I'm not standing on anything, I don't feel,
yes.
I mean, I feel stable, but when I think of myself in the world, I don't feel inherently a strong attachment to roots, to, I don't know, the earth. I feel like I'm just a visitor here observing you all. And I'm just trying to get to the point where, and I think I'm getting there, where that's not a source of depression, that this is a creative perspective.
I love that, Mike, because last night as I'm flipping around in my bed like a fish, thinking about that untethered feeling. And when you describe that, I think so many of us can relate. But can that also be a space where we can figure it out and be able to have some kind of peace? Because the seeking of that, it's so painful. because the reality is that we may never have that feeling that we so desire deep in our heart. And that's not to discourage anyone or make assumptions, but what do we do with that? And I think accepting your perspective, and that's really, really great. Thank you for that. So is there anything you'd like to say to the beautiful people listening?
Well, I think it's great you're listening. And I wish I would have plugged in sooner. I really tried to slog things out on my own for a long time. And that's still my tendency. I see any kind of asking for help as a weakness, So it's great you're listening. And something I've learned in the 12 steps is just focus on the day, because even myself, in my enlightenment, if I look to the future, it's just catastrophe. So I just have to focus on this day.
That's an important reminder.
In terms of specifically about being adopted, yeah, I think that I know for myself right now, it's like, because I feel this sense, it's much better, since I'm surrounded by family photos right now. But I have to keep creating, keep filling that void, and try to look at it as like a creative space. Just be in the process. They say that those who become the best create the most.
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe that. And I think it's so hard when you're depressed to even want to put 2 feet on the floor. But boy, if you can create anything and you can get that momentum going, some of the most beautiful things will come from it.
Yeah. And maybe it's utterly dark, And I think of, like, for example, some Smashing Pumpkins songs where
yes, it's okay.
A foster kid himself,
Yeah.
When I'm in a black mood, I'll put it on, and I'm, grateful that he put it out there.
We can see the darkness in each other and know that we are not alone, because It can feel so lonely. And I think that's why music and art, it connects us so deeply in the range of emotions, obviously. But I think some of the most beautiful things in the world have been brought through pain, like the fire of pain. And it just becomes something that has so much meaning. And Mike, I just so appreciate your time, and thank you for letting me do all these twists and turns in our interview. And you're just so talented, and your voice is so amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm just listening to it in my...
No, it got me in trouble in school a lot. I couldn't hide.
Yeah, I bet not. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks.